Hello everyone, this is Luke Flywalker and welcome to issue 44 of SL Aviation magazine. It's good to be back after a time off from filmmaking. Real life work and a few virtual life projects has kept me away from what I like to do best, but now I'm back and have a whole new series of videos in production. Since it's winter here in the northern hemisphere, we thought it'd be fun to do a winter flying video. Our first selection is a story written by Quinn Avery about flying in an ice storm. Please enjoy.
It was December 17th, a beautifully cool, sunny, and breezy winter's day in Second Life that tickled Quinn's whiskers. The wind light settings were full of picturesque cumulus clouds dancing across the horizon, of the type that are commonly present after a rainstorm. It was that day when Quinn receives an unexpected phone call from a very good female friend he hasn't seen in a very long time. She was visiting short-term down in the southern regions, and during the course of the conversation, the two of them make plans for Quinn to fly down to South Continent, about 90 miles or so, to pick her up tomorrow and take her out to dinner. Now, Quinn is quite familiarized with this particular air corridor, having flown it 2 or 3 times a week lately, commuting to a job site in southern Sansara. And that evening, Quinn makes a phone call to Flight Services for a weather briefing. Flight Services tells Quinn they can foresee a few snow flurries in the area tomorrow, but nothing that should be any real serious complication. And so Quinn went ahead and filed an FAA flight plan. Now, Quinn's airplane, the Kronos, is very well equipped with all the modern instrumentation. In fact, the only thing it doesn't have on board is de-icing equipment. However, Quinn has flown in these conditions before, and it is not unusual for him to come out of a 7,000-foot cruising altitude, down through a cloud layer, pick up some ice on the wings, and have it fall away on its own once the plane hits lower, warmer air. And especially lately, the threat of ice is low because the air temperatures are currently just too frigid for sleet to form anyway. In the wee hours of December 18th, Quinn wakes up at 0:30 and calls to get a final weather update, which reveals no immediate reason to abort today's trip. And so he runs off and retrieves his flight briefcase in his mouth and heads for the front door of his doghouse. Exciting and feeling a bit gregarious, Quinn runs across the tundra on all fours, wagging his tail, down to the hangar at Anton Airport in the middle of snow country of Second Life's Sansara continent. Tugging the hangar doors open, he uses a plane pull and tugs his small bi-wing pitch special out of the hangar backwards. He runs a hose from his hand-cranked 55-gallon barrels of avgas in the hangar, refuels the plane, does his walk-around, runs through his memorized list of pre-flight checks, and by 5:15 a.m. the engine is all warmed up and raring to go, 2 hours before sunrise. Over his NavCom radio, he asks the local ground control permission to taxi across the skirt and onto the runway run-up area. By the time he takes off, the air temperature on the ground is about -5 degrees Fahrenheit, meaning that at 7,000 feet, the wind chill factor factored in, the air temperature is expected to be about a -50 degrees. That's cold even to a dog. After takeoff, ground control hands Quinn to the regional Sansara East River Air Traffic Control operator out of East River Intercontinental Airport, who then gives him authorization to come on bearing east by southeast, and then tells Quinn, "Have a good flight. Over and out." Quinn settles in and sets his autopilot to OWN. He reaches into his flight case and pulls out a vacuum thermos, pours himself a nice hot cup of fresh brewed Cubby Terra imported coffee. For the moment, everything seems as normal as it could be, just another walk in the park. About 70 miles into this otherwise uneventful flight, he reaches behind the pilot's seat, into his Boy Scout first aid kit, and grabs out his flashlight and attempts to shine it out the starboard side window. The particles of snow flying past the plane could only be described as snow flurries, which is exactly what Quinn was briefed to be expecting. On the plane's instrumentation panel, the forward-looking radar starts painting pockets of weather along Quinn's filed flight plan, downrange at about 12 miles, but Quinn proceeds with confidence toward it. However, at the very moment Quinn passes into the first cloud, the plane immediately starts taking on a fairly huge amount of clear ice, which begins loading up the leading edges of the wings. As soon as Quinn realizes this, the hackles of his neck stand straight up, and he sits more square in his seat. The first thing he does is to reach over with a paw and shut off the autopilot, knowing this would continually auto-trim the plane's pitch to compensate for the building ice, until the plane just wouldn't fly anymore, at which point it's too late to do anything. Then he switches on cabin heat to full power and throws as much hot air onto the windshield as he can. And this works for the moment to maintain some level of visibility out the front windshield. But Quinn notices that his airspeed is slowly dropping from about 175 miles an hour cruising to about 95 miles an hour. He knows if the speed reaches 58 miles per hour, the plane won't fly anymore. The situation up here is deteriorating rather quickly, but Quinn feels he's still up to the task, so Quinn doesn't tell East River Air Traffic Control that he has an emergency when he contacts them and requests a lower altitude. In actuality, he makes the request because the plane is not able to hold its altitude, and fortunately East River Air Traffic Control clears him for 4,500 feet. By this time, the wing struts and leading edges of the plane are pretty much loaded up with ice, which makes all the controls very heavy and quite sluggish. Along in that early morning darkness, the plane continues losing lift in a slow but constant angle of descent. Quinn weighs his options. There are two other uncontrolled airfields Quinn can divert to and land at, Keachie's Heliport or Smuggler's Bluff. But not knowing how long he'll be able to keep his bird aloft, he chooses to avoid being over any populated areas and decides to stay over open, abandoned land. Almost to his destination, Quinn starts mentally toying with the idea that if he cannot maintain altitude to his first airport choice 10 miles away, then he may attempt a landing on the frozen snow-covered ground, which probably is a safe thing to do, unless he hits some small prim hidden in the ground fog and it tears up his landing gear. Then there would be survivability issues with the ambient temperatures on the ground, a lot of questions to ask, and paperwork to fill out. The situation has now become so serious that no matter what is going on in Quinn's mind, his number one first priority is to remain totally committed and focused on flying this plane. He gets on the horn again to Regional Air Traffic Control and informs them he has ice buildup, but again never declares any kind of emergency. At this point, the cockpit is a humid hot sauna, as every bit of hot air from the engine is being thrown at the windshield, which is literally covered by 1 to 2 inches of ice, and now there's absolutely no visibility out of it whatsoever. Quinn flies the plane IFR by trusting his artificial horizon to avoid spatial disorientation in the clouds, but watching the horizon out the port side window is utterly useless. While all this is going on, Quinn radios East River Air Traffic Control again and requests guidance to the nearest alternate airport runway localizer due to his continuing loss of altitude. Quinn informs the regional tower operator that he is requesting a very quick turn-on to bypass the normal landing pattern at the runway. Regional puts him immediately on track to the dirt field at Balmoral Airfield. Quinn successfully locates the runway localizer, but he's below it somewhat on the order of about 500 feet, and he's not able to see the rabbit at all. So Quinn crosses the plane controls and slips the tiny aircraft laterally to the left, where he's finally able to view some of the runway approach lights for the first time. It's fully snowing very hard right before touching, and Quinn is just able to maintain his altitude on the localizer and not get below it. But he has no way of knowing how quickly the ice on his wings is really building up out there, and he could literally just drop out of the sky at any moment. Due to the ice, the plane is already pitched in a landing attitude with nose up, and Quinn realizes there will not be any chance for a go-around today. It's a split-second decision not to use the flaps on landing because it could further spoil the airflow over the wings and create a tail stall right over the runway threshold. And so Quinn resolves himself to just coast down the entire runway in order to get stopped. Seconds before touching down, Quinn can see there are 3 to 4 inches of fresh snow on the runway tarmac. This is very eerie to him because there's no stall alarm, which has been encased and disabled by the wing ice. He lines up the plane on the runway, just throttles it back. Easy does it. He floats in and doesn't even know he's on the ground until he's rolling down the runway at 35 miles an hour. Quinn doesn't realize the truth of how dicey his situation was until he finally parks and gets out to tie down the little plane. There are clear icicles all over the craft from freezing rain, sticking to every rivet roller under the wings. Stunned, Quinn feels he must have had nothing short of angels flying with him. Finally, on the ground, safe and sound and recovering from the adrenaline rush, Quinn just scratches his neck fur with his hind foot for a long moment and shakes his head in disbelief. Then he goes into the heated runway building to get on the phone to his friend to come pick him up 7 miles away. Looking out the doorway at the plane, Quinn steps back outside and sits to finish his thermos of coffee, thinking to himself, any landing you can walk away from is a good one.
I filmed our second selection on the SL Grid Flight Group's Snowland Challenge. The flight begins at Smuggler's Bluff Airport on the Kania Sim. From there we travel to Anton Airstrip, Non-Antola Airport, Kichis Airport, and Balmoral Airfield, on which I'm standing now. Our final destination being a frozen lake landing at Lake Zermatt. This is what I love about SL Aviation. Pilots getting together for no other reason than just to enjoy the fun of flying. No drama, no politics, just aviation.